There is a silence settling over the Persian Gulf that should terrify every person watching the news right now. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of two heavily armed nations running out of patience with each other. The kind of silence that fell over Europe in the summer of 1914, right before the guns began to speak and nobody could make them stop. We are living through that silence right now, in real time, and the establishment media is treating it like background noise. Before we go any further, if you are watching this and you want to understand the world as it actually is, not as the politicians and cable news anchors wish it to be, then subscribe to this channel right now and turn on the notifications, because what we are about to discuss is the kind of analysis they do not want reaching you, the kind that cuts through the propaganda and delivers the raw, unfiltered mechanics of geopolitical reality. What we are witnessing between the United States and Iran is not a diplomatic dispute. It is not a negotiating tactic. It is not a chapter in an ongoing story that will resolve quietly in some back channel conversation in Geneva. What we are watching is the slow, grinding approach of two civilizational forces toward a confrontation that could reshape the entire architecture of the modern Middle East and drag the rest of the world into the wreckage with it. The establishment wants you to believe this is manageable, that cooler heads will prevail, that the adults are in the room. I have studied the mechanics of imperial power for decades, and I am telling you plainly, the room is on fire, and the adults left the building years ago. The thesis of everything we are about to dissect is this: the current escalation between Washington and Tehran is not a crisis born of the last few months. It is the accumulated consequence of 30 years of strategic miscalculation, broken agreements, coercive pressure, and ideological arrogance on both sides of this confrontation. And the Gulf region, which supplies a significant portion of the world's oil, which hosts some of the most strategically critical shipping lanes on the planet, and which sits at the crossroads of the emerging multipolar order, is now the stage upon which the final act of American unipolar dominance may be performed. The silence before this storm is deafening, and we are hearing it now. Let us be precise about what has actually happened, because precision is the enemy of propaganda. In recent months, the United States has dramatically escalated its military footprint across the Gulf region. Additional carrier strike groups have been positioned within striking distance of Iranian territory. B-52 strategic bombers, aircraft designed to deliver massive conventional and nuclear payloads, have conducted visible, deliberate overflight missions intended to send a message. Washington has intensified its maximum pressure sanctions campaign against Iranian oil exports, cutting off Tehran's access to the international financial system with a ferocity not seen since the early years of that policy. Simultaneously, Iran has responded by accelerating its nuclear enrichment program to levels that Western intelligence agencies now describe as dangerously close to weapons-grade capability. Iranian aligned forces across the region, in Yemen, in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Syria, have continued to probe American assets and allied positions. The Houthis in Yemen have demonstrated a capacity to strike maritime targets in the Red Sea with precision that has genuinely shocked Western naval planners. Let that sink in for a moment. A non-state actor operating with Iranian technical support, using relatively low-cost drone and missile technology, has effectively disrupted one of the world's most critical commercial shipping corridors. The cost to global trade has been measured in billions of dollars. The cost to American credibility has been measured in something far more precious: the growing recognition across the global south that the U.S. military umbrella, once considered absolute, has very real and very exposed limitations. This is not just a regional skirmish. This is not two countries arguing over a trade deal. This is the kinetic manifestation of a power transition that has been building for 2 decades. The establishment media will tell you that Iran is the aggressor, that Tehran is the destabilizing force, that all of this can be resolved if Iran simply complies with Western demands. But any student of realist geopolitics knows that this framing is not analysis, it is advocacy, and it serves interests that have nothing to do with your safety or your future. To understand why we are here, we must strip away the sanitized narratives and look at the raw truth of how this confrontation was engineered over decades of deliberate, aggressive American policy in a region it never truly understood. Cast your mind back to 1953. The United States and Great Britain orchestrated the overthrow of Iran's democratically elected Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossadegh. His crime was simple. He wanted Iran to control its own oil. The CIA's Operation Ajax installed the Shah, a pliant monarch who served Western oil interests and ran one of the most brutal secret police states in the Middle East. For 26 years, the Shah's Savak terrorized the Iranian population. Washington called him a valued partner and a pillar of regional stability. When the Iranian people finally erupted in revolution in 1979, the US establishment expressed shock and bewilderment. They should not have been surprised. You do not overthrow a democracy, install a torturer, drain a nation's resources for a quarter century, and then express confusion when that nation produces a profound and furious backlash. This historical context is not ancient history, it is the DNA of the current crisis. The Iranian leadership, whatever you think of its ideology, and there is plenty to criticize, operates from a position of absolute historical memory. They remember 1953. They remember the 8-year Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s, during which the United States provided Saddam Hussein with satellite intelligence, political cover, and precursors to the chemical weapons he used against Iranian soldiers. They remember that Washington backed Saddam while he was gassing Iranians, and then invaded Iraq 2 decades later under the banner of eliminating weapons of mass destruction. The hypocrisy is not subtle, it is structural. The Monroe Doctrine comparison is instructive here. The United States has spent 200 years declaring that no foreign power may establish a military or political presence in the Western Hemisphere that threatens American security. When the Soviet Union placed missiles in Cuba in 1962, the United States brought the world to the edge of nuclear annihilation rather than tolerate it. John Kennedy was willing to risk the extinction of human civilization to enforce the principle that America's near abroad is America's strategic property. Now consider Iran's perspective. American military bases encircle Iranian territory. The U.S. Fifth Fleet is headquartered in Bahrain, 40 miles from Iran's coastline. American forces operate in Iraq to Iran's west, in Afghanistan historically to Iran's east, in the Gulf states to Iran's south. Washington demands that Iran accept this encirclement as natural, as legitimate, as simply the architecture of the free world. The demand that Iran make itself strategically naked, while the most powerful military in human history presses against every border, is not a request for security, it is a demand for submission, and Iran has refused to submit. That refusal is the engine of everything we are now watching unfold. The nuclear issue follows the same logic. Iran signed the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action in 2015. Tehran accepted rigorous inspections, accepted limits on its enrichment capacity, accepted a framework that international monitors verified was being honored. In 2018, the United States unilaterally withdrew from that agreement, not because Iran had violated it. The International Atomic Energy Agency confirmed repeatedly that Iran was in compliance. Washington withdrew because a political administration decided that maximum pressure, not negotiation, was the preferred instrument of coercion. The message sent to Tehran and to every other government watching was, unambiguous. If you sign an agreement with the United States may simply discard it when the political winds shift. The lesson Iran drew from that experience is the same lesson North Korea drew from watching Libya disarm and then collapse. Agreements with Washington are not guarantees. They are temporary arrangements that exist only as long as they serve American interests. We must now confront the failure cascade that has brought us to this precise and dangerous moment. And the cascade is breathtaking in its scope. Begin with the sanctions. For over 4 decades, the United States has maintained and progressively tightened an economic siege of Iran that would have broken most nations. The Iranian economy has been excluded from the global financial system. Iranian oil, which Iran has every sovereign right to sell, has been blocked from international markets through threats directed at any country that dares to purchase it. Iranian banks cannot access SWIFT. Iranian citizens cannot use basic international financial services. The annual cost to the Iranian economy runs into hundreds of billions of dollars over the lifetime of this campaign. And what has it achieved? Iran's nuclear program is more advanced today than it has ever been. Iran's regional influence is greater today than it was when sanctions began. Iran's relationships with Russia and China are deeper and more institutionalized than at any previous point in history. The mechanism of maximum pressure has not produced Iranian capitulation. It has produced Iranian adaptation. Tehran has built a sanctions-resistant economic architecture, trading in alternative currencies, deepening barter arrangements, integrating with the emerging multipolar financial system that Russia and China are constructing as a deliberate alternative to Western financial hegemony. Iran supplies Russia with drones that are being used in Ukraine. Russia supplies Iran with advanced military technology. China purchases Iranian oil regardless of American sanctions, providing Tehran with the economic oxygen that Washington has tried to cut off. The axis of the sanctioned has discovered that their combined resilience exceeds Washington's ability to coerce. This is the nightmare scenario that the architects of maximum pressure never adequately modeled. Look now at the establishment media's framing of all of this. You are told that Iran is building toward a nuclear weapon that threatens Israel and the Western world. You are not told that Israel possesses an estimated 90 nuclear warheads and has never signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, never accepted international inspections, and has conducted military strikes against nuclear facilities in multiple neighboring countries. You are not told that the United States maintains thousands of nuclear warheads. You are not told that NATO has stationed nuclear weapons in 5 European countries. The demand that Iran and only Iran, in a region saturated with external nuclear capability, must never develop a deterrent capability is not a principled position on nuclear non-proliferation. It is a selective application of rules designed to preserve a regional power balance that serves specific interests. The military dimension of this failure is equally stark. For years, American officials insisted that Iran's proxy network, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, various militia groups in Iraq and Syria, was manageable, containable. The Houthis, a movement the US government barely took seriously a decade ago, have now forced a rerouting of significant portions of global shipping traffic. The insurance costs for vessels transiting the Red Sea have multiplied. Energy prices across Europe have felt the pressure. American and British naval assets have conducted hundreds of intercept missions, attempting to shoot down Houthi projectiles, burning through extraordinarily expensive interceptor missiles to defeat extraordinarily inexpensive drones. The economics of this exchange are catastrophic for Washington. Iran's allies are winning the cost-exchange ratio battle decisively, and every analyst with access to the actual numbers knows it. Here is where the narrative the establishment has constructed begins to visibly collapse. and where the gap between what you are being told and what is actually happening becomes impossible to ignore. The official story is one of American strength projecting deterrence. Carrier groups in the Gulf signal resolve. Sanctions signal seriousness. Diplomatic warnings signal clear communication. In this narrative, Iran is a rogue regime being steadily pressured into compliance by a determined and unified Western alliance. That is the story. Now observe the reality. The Abraham Accords, which Washington celebrated as a historic realignment of the Middle East, have not produced the regional coalition against Iran that their architects promised. Saudi Arabia, the kingdom that was supposed to anchor a pro American, anti Iranian bloc, has conducted direct diplomatic negotiations with Tehran, restoring full ambassadorial relations in a deal brokered not by Washington, but by Beijing. Read that sentence again carefully. The two largest Arab and Persian powers in the Gulf region normalized their relationship through Chinese mediation. That is not a diplomatic footnote. That is a civilizational headline. It announces to every government in the region that there is now a credible alternative broker of stability, one that does not come with the destabilizing baggage of American political interference. The Gulf states themselves are hedging with a sophistication that should alarm anyone paying attention. The UAE has deepened its economic relationship with China while maintaining its American security partnerships. Qatar hosts the largest American airbase in the region while simultaneously maintaining functional relationships with Iran and serving as a diplomatic channel when Washington needs one. Saudi Arabia joined BRICS. These are not the actions of a region rallying behind American leadership. These are the actions of governments that have made a quiet but unmistakable assessment. The American unipolar moment in the Middle East is ending, and the wise move is to have relationships on both sides of the emerging divide. Washington's ability to control the narrative has collapsed alongside its ability to control the strategic environment. In 2003, the US could launch an invasion of a sovereign nation on the basis of intelligence that turned out to be fabricated, and most of the Western media carried the government's framing without meaningful challenge. Today, the world watched the Houthis. The Houthis forced the world's most powerful navy into a sustained, expensive, and not entirely successful defensive campaign in the Red Sea. The gap between the story of American military invincibility and the visible reality of American military limitation is creating what can only be described as a legitimacy crisis for the entire post Cold War order. The global reckoning triggered by this escalating confrontation extends far beyond the Gulf, and its consequences are coming home to your wallet and your daily life, whether you follow geopolitics or not. Consider the Eurasian dimension. Russia and Iran have moved beyond tactical cooperation into something that resembles a genuine strategic partnership. Their relationship is institutionalized across military, energy, financial, and diplomatic channels. Russia has provided Iran with advanced air defense systems. Iran has provided Russia with the drone technology that has reshaped the battlefield in Ukraine. Both nations have incentive to ensure the other does not collapse under Western pressure, because the collapse of one would dramatically increase the vulnerability of the other. This is precisely the kind of entangling alliance that American strategists spent decades trying to prevent. The policy of maximum pressure, applied simultaneously to Russia over Ukraine and to Iran over its nuclear program, has achieved the opposite of its intended effect. It has welded these two powers together in a relationship of mutual strategic dependency. China's position is equally consequential. Beijing purchases Iranian oil in volumes that make American sanctions partially ineffective. China has participated in joint naval exercises with Russia and Iran in the Gulf of Oman, exercises that were conducted with obvious symbolic intent. demonstrating that the U.S. does not hold a monopoly on naval presence in these waters. China has invested significantly in Iranian infrastructure through its Belt and Road Initiative, and China has a fundamental interest in ensuring that the Strait of Hormuz, through which approximately 20% of the world's oil supply passes, remains open for commerce. A military conflict that closes the Strait of Hormuz would devastate the global economy, including China's. Beijing therefore has strong incentive to prevent open warfare, but equally strong incentive to ensure that Washington does not achieve regime change in Tehran, which would remove a critical node in the emerging multipolar infrastructure. The swing states of the global south are watching all of this with intense and calculating attention. India, which maintains relationships with both Washington and Tehran, purchases Iranian oil and cannot afford to be dictated to by American sanctions policy without domestic political consequences. Turkey, a NATO member, maintains functional relations with Iran and has refused to join the sanctions regime. Indonesia, the world's largest Muslim majority nation, has its own strategic calculations about alignment. These nations are not going to march in lockstep behind American policy in the Gulf. The era in which Washington could simply announce a coalition and expect the world to fall in line has ended. The proof is in the arithmetic. Look at the UN votes. Look at the sanctions participation rates. Look at who actually showed up for the coalitions of the willing and who quietly declined. And then there is the consequence that arrives directly at your door. The Strait of Hormuz is not an abstraction. Roughly one-fifth of global oil supply transits that narrow waterway daily. Any serious military confrontation between the United States and Iran has explicitly and repeatedly threatened to close the strait in the event of an attack, would produce an energy price shock of a magnitude that the global economy has not experienced since the 1970s oil crisis. Gasoline prices, heating costs, the price of every manufactured good that requires energy to produce or transport, all of it would surge. The inflationary impact would be immediate and severe. The populations of Europe and North America, already exhausted by the economic pressures of the post-pandemic years and the Ukraine-related energy disruption, would face a compounding shock that no Western government has a credible plan to manage. This is not theoretical, this is arithmetic, and the architects of maximum pressure in Washington have, to this point, shown very little evidence that they have adequately accounted for it. We are standing at the absolute twilight of the strategic framework that has governed the Middle East since the end of the Cold War. The long shadows of American dominance are lengthening across the Gulf, and in the gathering dark, a new and deeply uncertain architecture is struggling to take shape. The United States now faces a binary choice of the kind that history does not offer twice. The first path is the path of strategic realism, of accepting that military encirclement, sanctions, pressure, and the politics of regime change have not and will not produce an Iran that accepts American hegemony. This path requires genuine, unconditional engagement, a return to the negotiating table without preconditions designed to ensure failure, a willingness to offer Iran the security guarantees that every sovereign nation deserves in exchange for verifiable limits on its nuclear program, and an acceptance that Iran will continue to be a significant regional power with its own interests, its own alliances, and its own legitimate national security requirements. It requires Washington to treat the Gulf not as a zone of American supremacy, but as a shared strategic space where multiple powers, minus including Iran, have legitimate stakes. This path is politically difficult. It requires courage. It requires the abandonment of a decades-long posture that has become embedded in the institutional culture of the State Department, the Pentagon, and the intelligence community. But it is the only path that leads away from catastrophe. The second path is the one that every signal from Washington currently suggests the establishment has chosen. It is the path of escalation, dressed as deterrence. More sanctions, more carrier groups, more covert operations, more proxy pressure, more red lines drawn and redrawn, more of exactly the policy that has produced exactly the situation we are now in. This is the path of an empire that has confused activity with strategy and motion with progress. It is the path that leads, with a logic as cold and inevitable as gravity, toward a military confrontation that nobody, not Washington, not Tehran, not Beijing, not Moscow, not the ordinary people of the Gulf, can fully control once it begins. Iran will not back down from a direct attack. The consequences of Iranian retaliation, the closure of Hormuz, the activation of the entire regional proxy network, the potential for the conflict to draw in Russia and to complicate China's calculations are consequences that the American military has wargamed, and the results of those war games are not public, but the behavior of the people who have seen them is telling. They are cautious in ways that contradict their rhetoric. They are escalating with one hand and searching for off ramps with the other. Tragically, every institutional signal from the Washington establishment suggests they are constitutionally incapable of choosing the first path. The political system rewards toughness and punishes what it frames as weakness. The defense industry has structural incentives that align with escalation rather than de escalation. The think tanks and the media infrastructure that shape elite opinion have spent decades constructing a worldview in which Iranian capitulation is the only acceptable outcome. The people inside that system, however intelligent and however well intentioned, are operating with a map of reality that does not match the territory. They would rather escalate toward a confrontation they cannot guarantee winning than accept the political cost of the negotiated settlement that realism demands. The Persian Gulf is telling us something that the noise of establishment media is designed to prevent us from hearing. It is telling us that the post Cold War order, the order in which American military and financial power set the rules and everyone else accepted them, is ending not because America's enemies are more powerful than America, but because American power, stretched across 800 military bases, exhausted by 2 decades of unwinnable wars, undermined by the weaponization of its own financial system, and increasingly resisted by a global majority that has simply grown tired of living under its terms, that power has reached its limits. Gulf is the place where those limits are most dangerously exposed. History does not send warning letters, it sends events. The Houthis disrupting global shipping, Saudi Arabia normalizing with Iran through Chinese mediation, the Abraham Accords proving insufficient to build the regional coalition Washington imagined. These are not random occurrences. They are history's way of telling you that the map no longer matches the territory. The question is not whether the old order is ending, the question is whether its ending will be managed through the painful but survivable path of strategic adaptation, or whether it will arrive through the catastrophic and potentially civilization altering path of open warfare in the most energy critical waterway on Earth. Every signal we have says that Washington has not yet made that choice consciously. It is drifting toward confrontation on the autopilot of institutional momentum, ideology, and the political economy of the defense state. And drifting nations, like drifting ships, tend to discover the rocks, not when they choose to, but when it is already too late to steer away. The Gulf is not heading toward a major confrontation because either side has planned one. It is heading there because the mechanisms that might prevent one are broken, and the people who should be repairing them are instead doubling down on the policies that broke them. That is the truth of what is happening right now in the waters between Arabia and Persia, and it is a truth you deserve to hear without the filter of those who profit from your ignorance. If this analysis has given you a clearer picture of what is actually at stake in the Gulf, if you are tired of being managed and you are ready to be informed, then do one thing right now. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, because the algorithm suppresses analysis like this precisely because it challenges the official story. The only way it reaches people is if you carry it there. We are building an archive of what actually happened for the people who will look back and ask why nobody told them the truth while there was still time to understand it. Do not let them say that about you. Leave your answers in the comments. First, do you believe a direct military confrontation between the United States and Iran is now inevitable? Or is there still a realistic diplomatic path that neither side has yet seriously attempted? And second, if the Strait of Hormuz closes, even temporarily, how prepared do you think your own country is for the economic consequences? Write your answers below. The debate belongs to you.